Nearly everything that is known about the founding of Theta Chi comes from the original minutes book. While not part of the official minutes, the fly-leaf cover reads, "The Theta Chi Society was the idea and plan of Frederick Norton Freeman, and with the assistance of Arthur Chase, his plans were perfected and the society was organized at Norwich University on Thursday, April 10th, 1856 at 9:00 p.m. This record was written in the hand of Frederick Norton Freeman. Norwich University was founded in 1819 at Norwich, Vermont by Captain Alden Partridge, who at one time had been the superintendent of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Norwich was the first engineering college in the United States, but its charter called for a course of military instruction as well, both practical and theoretical. Norwich stressed the ideal of the citizen soldier. In 1853, a secret society called the Regulators was organized by cadets at Norwich. The purpose of the Regulators was to correct certain wrongs then tolerated by students and faculty on campus. The Regulators published a newspaper which gave advice to the students and faculty alike regarding conduct. Frederick Norton Freeman and Arthur Chase may have been members of the Regulators. However, their membership cannot be proven definitively. After the Regulators disbanded, many of its members joined Alpha Sigma Pi, a fraternity founded shortly after Theta Chi on the Norwich campus. Norwich cadets were housed in the Old South Barracks. The founding of Theta Chi took place secretly in the hour just before the call for lights out. All meetings were held in members' rooms for the first 2 years of Theta Chi's existence, until a separate room of the Old South Barracks was set aside for the use of the fraternity. Frederick Norton Freeman was born in Claremont, New Hampshire on March 2, 1839. He entered Norwich University at the age of 14, and he was barely 17 years old when Theta Chi was founded. Freeman was patriotic and committed to good citizenship. At Norwich's 1856 commencement, he delivered an oration titled, "The American's Privileges and Duties." In the fall of 1856, Freeman served as the adjutant, the only regular cadet officer at Norwich. After graduating in 1857, Freeman traveled to Georgia, perhaps to seek a position at one of the military colleges there. Upon returning to New Hampshire, he studied law in his father's office until 1859. Arthur Chase was born at Bellows Falls, Vermont on October 21, 1835. Freeman and Chase were actually very distant cousins. Chase's father was an Episcopal minister who later became the first bishop of New Hampshire. Following his graduation from Norwich in 1856, Chase attended Harvard Law School. At Norwich's 1860 commencement exercises, Chase was awarded an honorary master's degree and delivered an oration titled, "True Liberty, Freedom Subject to Law and Reason." The minutes for the first meeting of the Theta Chi Society, as it was then known, were also written by Freeman. They give us an insight into the great care the founders took in organizing Theta Chi. They met according to plan, and the meeting was called to order by Arthur Chase. The original ritual was simple, and the minutes state that Chase and Freeman mutually took the oaths prescribed and declared each other true and accepted members of the Theta Chi Society. Chase was elected as the first president and Freeman as the first secretary. Both founders were elected as guards. The first two members after the founders, Edward Bancroft Williston and Lorenzo Potter, were voted on and elected as members. The meeting was then adjourned until the following night. While Freeman and Chase are properly given credit for the founding of Theta Chi, they were assisted by a former Norwich cadet named Egbert Phelps. Phelps had transferred to Union College in 1854, where he became a member of the Chi Psi fraternity. Phelps evidently stayed in contact with Freeman and Chase and his initiation into Chi Psi most certainly had an influence on the formation of Theta Chi. It is Phelps who is said to have contributed both the name and the design of the badge for Theta Chi. After his death, Phelps was made an honorary member of Theta Chi fraternity. The second meeting of the newly formed Theta Chi Society was held on the night after the founding, Friday, April 11, 1856. At this meeting, Williston and Potter were initiated. Frederick Fair was elected a member, and the society decided not to accept any new members until matters relating to the badge had been resolved. Edward Bancroft Williston, shown seated in the center of this 1854 photograph, was the first initiate after the founders. Williston was born in the town of Norwich, Vermont, and was a nephew of Norwich University founder Alden Partridge. Shortly after he was initiated, Williston went to San Diego, California, where he worked on a ranch owned by his half-brother, but his interest in the fraternity continued. Lorenzo Potter of Elkhorn, Wisconsin, was also initiated at the second meeting. Freeman began working on the question of securing the first badges, perhaps even before the founding. The first letter to the jewelers in Boston was received by the company on April 12, 1856. The first lot of badges was not acceptable, and a second was made. The very first badges cost $3.75 apiece, which equates to a present-day price of about $76.50 per badge. These badges were slightly larger and flatter than a modern badge. Arthur Chase's badge, shown here, is still in the possession of the fraternity. By a vote of the chapter members, the badges were worn publicly for the first time on Monday, June 9, 1856. The first roster of the fraternity lists all 12 members that had been initiated from the founding until January of 1857. These men could properly be called the first chapter of Theta Chi. The first members of Theta Chi were from several states, including Louisiana, Wisconsin, Ohio, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts. From the very start, even though there was only one chapter, Theta Chi was truly national in character. It is interesting to note that while there was only one chapter at the time, the first convention was held on the morning of August 12, 1857 in the Old South Barracks. At this convention it was decided to change the password and grip, as they had been learned during a robbery earlier that year. It was also decided that the password and grip should never be written down, but handed down verbally. In the same year as this first convention, efforts were made to expand Theta Chi to both Union and Dartmouth colleges, but these efforts proved unsuccessful. Within 5 years of the founding of Theta Chi, the winds of civil war began to blow across the nation. Life at Norwich University would never be the same, nor would Theta Chi fraternity. In the coming years, both would have to overcome nearly insurmountable obstacles. Both Freeman and Chase maintained contact with the society they had founded, and both had an interest in its development. In October 1860, the chapter had requested suggestions for an engraving for a printed emblem for the fraternity. Freeman sent a drawing to the chapter, along with a letter suggesting that the engraving should be an exact copy of the badge, along with an alpha to signify the Alpha chapter, and hands joined below to signify friendship. In April of 1861, the very first coat of arms for Theta Chi made its appearance in the Reveille, a student newspaper at Norwich. The coat of arms incorporated some of Freeman's earlier suggestions. The Reveille had been started by Theta Chi brother George A. Converse. Converse was later an admiral in the United States Navy. On April 13, 1861, just one day after the shelling of Fort Sumter, the first Alpha men left for service in the Civil War. Theta Chi served for both the Union and the Confederacy during the war, exemplifying courage and honor for both sides. In 1860, Freeman was associated with the Yonkers Collegiate and Military Academy in New York, where as superintendent he carried the title of colonel. In 1862, the institution moved to Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and became known as the Eagleswood Military Academy. In July of that year, the Alpha chapter wrote to Freeman in regards to establishing a chapter of Theta Chi at the institution. However, this expansion attempt was rejected, perhaps in part due to the Civil War. Arthur Chase also put his military training from Norwich to good use during the war. He served as a drill master for a regiment of New Hampshire volunteers. He offered to lead the regiment in combat, but another man was appointed to do so, likely on account of Chase's deteriorating health. At the outbreak of the Civil War, Theta Chi's first initiate after the founders, Edward Bancroft Williston, volunteered for the Army and was commissioned a second lieutenant. He fought in 13 major battles of the war, including Antietam and Gettysburg. Williston was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for gallantry in action. After the war, he served as the military governor of Havana, Cuba, and the provost marshal of Manila in the Philippines. He retired from the Army in 1900 with the rank of brigadier general. Williston died in 1920 and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Frederick Farrar was the third initiate after the founders. Brother Farrar was commissioned a captain in the Confederate Army, rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel and commanding the 1st Louisiana Infantry. He was killed at the Battle of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on January 5, 1863. Confederate General Leonidas Polk wrote of him, "Among those who fell mortally wounded was Lieutenant Colonel Farrar. This young officer was one of the most promising of the Army, intelligent, chivalrous, and brave. His loss will be felt by his country and lamented by his many friends." The earliest known copy of the ritual and constitution of the fraternity are dated 1863. The constitution, shown here, and the ritual book are very similar. Both copies are written entirely by hand, and it is assumed that both were transcribed from earlier copies. Since the original minutes mention no material change to either the ritual or constitution, it can be assumed that these works are essentially the same as those drafted by Freeman and Chase. In October of 1864, the Dartmouth chapter of Alpha Delta Phi offered a proposal to the Alpha chapter of Theta Chi to be absorbed by that fraternity. Theta Chi seriously considered but ultimately rejected this proposal. After the war, classes continued on the campus in Norwich, but on March 14, 1866, tragedy struck when the Old South Barracks burned to the ground. Fortunately, no one was hurt in the fire, and luckily for Theta Chi, the chapter's lodge room at the time was in the North Barracks. Many, if not all, of the early records of the fraternity survived the fire. The destruction of the Old South Barracks was a serious blow to both Norwich University and Theta Chi. The fire, coupled with strong anti-military sentiment that followed the Civil War, left the future of Norwich University in doubt. After the war, Frederick Norton Freeman became the superintendent of the Pennsylvania Coal Company in Newburgh, New York. While engaged in the construction of a new dock on the Hudson River, Freeman contracted a severe cold which progressed rapidly to pneumonia. Freeman died suddenly on March 28, 1867. He was barely 28 years old. Freeman was a young man of great promise and achievement who held positions of responsibility and trust far beyond his years. Freeman is buried just outside of Plainfield, New Hampshire. After the fire that destroyed the Old South Barracks, Norwich University relocated to Northfield, Vermont. By 1868, parts of the new Jackman Hall were ready, and classes were held there even as construction continued on the building. For some time, Jackman Hall would serve as barracks, classroom, and the home of Theta Chi fraternity. In 1868, Arthur Chase purchased and assumed editorship of the Claremont, New Hampshire newspaper, the National Eagle. Chase's editorials would focus on, quote, principles and practices which conduce the highest good for the greatest number. After 3 years of newspaper work, Chase's health, which had never been robust, began to deteriorate. On the advice of his physician, he retired to a farm he had purchased on the outskirts of town, but he continued to be very involved in civic affairs. His interest in Theta Chi also continued, as evidenced by his visits and letters to the chapter throughout his entire life. In 1873, the finances of Norwich University were in a desperate condition. Charles Dole, class of 1869 and a member of Theta Chi, was serving as a professor at that time. Rising to meet the needs of his alma mater, Dole met all of the university's financial obligations out of his own pocket at great personal loss. This action likely saved both Norwich University as well as Theta Chi. 1873 also saw several developments at the Alpha chapter. During the year, the offices of treasurer and librarian were added. The chapter also voted to have a group picture taken for, quote, reasons known to themselves. By 1880, a new engraving was made for the Theta Chi coat of arms. It retained a military nature and continued Freeman's suggestions by emphasizing the badge. In 1881, the 25th anniversary year of Theta Chi, Brother Henry Martin Jones graduated from Norwich University. The student body was reduced to a dozen men, and Theta Chi found itself with one active member. This man, James Michael Holland. Holland carefully took possession of all the fraternity belongings, including the ritual and constitution of Theta Chi. Holland may have believed it was hopeless to try to recruit new members to a fraternity with just one member, and remained silent as to the condition of Theta Chi. Fortunately for Theta Chi, Phil Sheridan Randall enrolled in Norwich during the autumn of 1881. Randall, along with all 6 of Norwich's other incoming freshmen, were given bids to join the university's other fraternity, Alpha Sigma Pi. Randall knew of Theta Chi and its distinguished alumni and set out to convince Holland that he should be allowed to join the fraternity. Randall's friend and roommate, Henry Hersey, was another freshman cadet. Hersey had distinguished himself early at Norwich by dealing with a campus bully during the first days of the semester, and was not keen on joining Theta Chi's rival. Hersey agreed with Randall, and the 2 freshmen approached Holland. Randall and Hersey were initiated by James Michael Holland and Professor Charles Dole, along with other local alumnus members, in the Theta Chi room in Jackman Hall. From this point on, Theta Chi flourished at Norwich. Hersey went on to become a major in the U.S. Army, serving with Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders. Randall would serve as a judge in Minnesota, and his involvement in Theta Chi continued through his entire life. At one point, Randall was the oldest living member of Theta Chi. He died in 1960 at the age of 94. Arthur Chase died suddenly on November 20th, 1888. He was 53 years old and survived by his wife and 4 children. This resolution of the Alpha chapter commemorates Chase and reads in part, with the death of our beloved brother, Arthur Chase, the mystic circle of Theta Chi has again been broken and one of her brightest lights extinguished. His grandson, Dr. Eugene P. Chase, was a professor at Lafayette College and also a member of Theta Chi. In the late 1880s, Professor Dole was serving in the Vermont State Legislature. Under his guidance, Theta Chi fraternity was formally incorporated under the laws of Vermont on November 22, 1888. Unfortunately, this was just 2 days after the death of Arthur Chase. In 1890, the Alpha chapter acquired its first true chapter house just steps away from the campus of Norwich University. While cadets were required to live in the barracks, The house served as a location for meetings, study, and socializing. Theta Chi's Alpha chapter continued to prosper just before the turn of the century, as this 1898 photograph of the chapter will attest. However, a strong anti-expansion sentiment existed among the members, and the dream of Frederick Norton Freeman and Arthur Chase for a truly national fraternity had not yet been realized. In 1901, Brother Park Valentine Perkins left Norwich University and transferred to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Perkins wanted to expand Theta Chi to MIT, and soon he had gathered around him a group of friends who petitioned the Alpha chapter for a charter. The Alpha chapter denied the MIT group's first two petitions. However, the group soon gained the support and assistance of local alumnus members E. Wesson Clark and J. Albert Holmes. Holmes later became the first national president of Theta Chi. Alpha finally agreed to expand on the third petition, and the Beta chapter was installed on December 13, 1902, marking the beginning of Theta Chi as a national fraternity. This photograph shows some of the members from both chapters on the day after the installation. By the early part of the 20th century, a new coat of arms had been created. All vestiges of a military character had fallen away, and the appearance became more academic. This version was used for about 3 years until an early version of the current coat of arms came into existence. During the 75th anniversary convention in 1931, this monument commemorating the founding of Theta Chi fraternity was dedicated near the site of the Old South Barracks in Norwich, Vermont. The idea and plan of Frederick Norton Freeman and Arthur Chase has been realized and perfected. This union of men working together is accomplishing more and greater things than any single member. And because the mutual assistance to one another is of value, the men of Theta Chi fraternity continue to seek the bonds of fellowship which bind man to man.